And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we are going to talk about the featured formats that were rolled out in the March 22nd post on the Upper Deck blog. This is, I guess I said featured formats, but it's actually one featured format. Once upon a time, we used to get half a year at a time. I guess that's one additional thing that has changed over recent releases. So, this is featured format 19. It is called Duality, and it's kind of there are familiar aspects to it, and it is kind of a weird one as well. Both of these things are true. So, in summary, your deck must have exactly 2 copies of its supporting characters, plot twists, and equipment. No more, no less. For locations, you must have at least 2 copies of any that are in the deck, but you can have more. So you are not limited to 2, but you can't do a one of location. So I guess the nexus of all realities is the only one-of-a-kind location that comes immediately to mind. Banned in this format. All one-of-a-kind cards banned in this format. So that's the summary at the top of the article. This season will go into effect starting spring of 2023, which will be April 1st through June 31st. So this is not our Gen Con format. Rules. You must have exactly 2 copies of each supporting character, plot twist, and equipment that you put in your deck, which is essentially the same as the summary just above. You have to have at least 2 copies of each location, but again, you can have more. Now, this is where I actually got confused in initially reading this. You can't have more than 2 different main characters total anywhere. Now, I initially interpreted that as cards. So I was thinking if a main character had 3 levels, they weren't playable in this format because that's 3. But that's just wrong. That is just not correct. So this is limiting you to 2 different main characters in total anywhere. Your deck, your level up zone, your out of game piles, different levels of the same unique main character are allowed. So I just basically didn't read that last sentence when I initially skimmed this article. You can have the usual 1 main character. It levels up normally. You can have exactly 2 main characters, assuming an effect says you can, and they level up normally. So to break that down just a little bit, stuff like Outriders, not that anybody would want to, but you cannot come to the game with your Outriders and go, oh, well, I'm only allowed 2 in this format, and choose to not play the other 4. If a character requires you to have more than 2 main characters, you can't play that main character. So Moon Girl Devil Dino, it's fine. The Bark Bros, fine. But anything like I'm drawing a blank on the mechanic, the Spider-Verse cards that let you have main characters in your deck, that's not going to be allowed here. Well, I guess it could be allowed, but you'd only get 1 card, I guess. You can't use main characters if they start the game with more than 2 in play, or if there are more than 2 of them across your deck, level up zone, and out of game piles. This restriction applies to unique main characters as well as main characters with swarm. So I kind of already broke that down. Further, you can't use a main character if it says you start the game with 3 or more of them on your side, and you can't use a main character if it requires an out of game pile that has 2 or more main characters in it. That's pretty much all the information about the format in the article. There is a shout out down here, or a reminder rather, at the bottom of the article that there is a regional tournament going to be held in San Francisco on April 1st, and it is going to feature previously on as the format. So I'm curious to see what kind of results we get out of that, although I think that meta is largely solved. So to look back at this, or to look forward towards the upcoming meta, Duality. So initially I said this kind of feels familiar, and it does in the sense that we've seen the Singularity format, which allowed 1 copy. Now, 1 copy of each card is a game mechanic that we've seen across other games. The original Versus system had a deck that used a mechanic called Insanity, which essentially was a Highlander deck, which calling it a Highlander deck is a term that comes from Magic. So there are other games that have done a single copy format, and I've certainly encountered games where they have limitations based on rarity. So common cards you can run 4 of, uncommons 3, rares 2, that kind of thing. I'm not sure that I've encountered a game with a 60 card deck where you're limited to 2 copies of a card. Sure, in Hearthstone, you get 2 copies of a card, but that's a 30 card deck. And certainly when teaching Versus, I've built decks that are 30 card decks with a limit of 2 copies to each thing as a way to kind of introduce the game to new players. This is none of those things. I mean, it's a little bit of all of them, but it isn't wholly any of them. So this is an open format. There's no modern ban list put on top of this because this is the official Upper Deck format. I don't think ever going to use our modern ban list. This isn't for incursion. So this is all the big bads that can fit within the cubby of the Duality format. So we're looking at degenerate stuff like Invisible Woman having access to Monarch, Rogue having access to Kane, definitely ramping into the Dark Phoenix supporting character, the Dark Phoenix main character. There's a lot of really gross stuff that's allowed here. Now, some really gross, degenerate stuff is banned. I already talked about Outriders. Of course, the other like really big gross thing that happened, or one of the other really big gross things that happens in photographic format is using the Mayor and the Parallel Dimension plot twist. Well, Parallel Dimension is one of a kind, so that's banned. Nullifier is banned. So there's a lot of things that you might go so far as to call saints, a lot of different formats, and that does include banning some degenerate stuff. I imagine this causes all of the Alpha Sentinels to be banned, and you could only play two. You can only play 2 of the executive type. That seems extremely bad. So there's another one of the kind of recent big bads that's banned. Venom is not. Queens is not. So there are definitely going to be degenerate things within the format. And how degenerate the format gets overall, I think is probably going to come down to who has the better draw. This could result in a lot of variety, and I am a fan of variety to a degree within the game. Now, when I play my deck, I don't really like my deck to have variety. I want my deck to be very consistent and doing the thing that I built my deck to do. But since we're all going to be subject to the same kind of restriction, we're all going to get this injection of inconsistency / variety into our deck builds. And I think that's pretty cool. It seems very likely that if you look at a list of the best main characters in an open format, in the multiverse format, and you just delete the ones that aren't playable within Duality, most of the rest of the remaining best main characters will probably still be in Tier 1. I do see things like, yes, Rogue and Dark Phoenix are both legal and very problematic, or very powerful, I guess would be a better way to phrase it. But they're also very reliant on being able to get to those locations. And you're only going to have the 2 copies of Kane, so you can't be as reliant on Kane going and fishing that stuff out for you. So there are some interesting questions posed by this format, although I think once we knuckle down and really dig into it, ultimately, a lot of this is going to be stuff that we kind of already know about. I'm not predicting massive surprises here. Yeah, I do think there's going to be an opportunity here for maybe some like Tier 2, possibly even Tier 3 cards, just due to the restrictions on how we build our decks. We can't devote as many slots to the absolute cream of the crop best of the best cards, which means some of these less played but still powerful cards that kind of filter down into the Tier 2, Tier 3 power level for supporting characters, plot twists, and equipment. I think some of these are going to essentially jump to the top to fill in the gaps created by not being able to run a full 4-stack of whatever your favorite character is on turn 3, say. That could be really interesting. It could also be really frustrating to be the person who you've got the answer in your deck and you're just drawing the other cards that you're playing because you couldn't go 4 copies of the answer that you actually wanted to hit. And that's likely to happen to everybody who plays at some point or another. Just, oh man, the inconsistency got me in that game. We've all felt that. And this is certainly a format that's going to encourage inconsistency a little more than other formats. That said, I don't think every format needs to be the hardcore tournament player, most consistent, highly optimized, super efficient type of format. This format is a little bit sillier. There are going to be some strange card inclusions in people's decks, I'm sure. Again, for the reasons I already laid out. And I'm here for it. I'm here to see it. I'm glad this is not the Gen Con format. I'm very glad that this is not a format that's going to... Well, I don't know. We haven't seen the announcements yet. So if I was going to a cash event that I cared really deeply about doing well in, this is a format that I think is a recipe to make me angry, or has the potential to make me angry if I'm playing for stakes that I'm really deeply invested in. As a format to play at like a local tournament at the card shop, or in like an online league, or like any of these, like not like at Gen Con, I would not be super stoked for this format. But basically every tier of competitive play beneath that, I think this can be fun. I'm fine with this. Overall, the thing about formats is, even if the particular one doesn't really speak to me, if it's a format that I don't really care for, they only stick around for a few months, and at least thus far, I don't think we've seen too many repeats other than like, hey, we want you to play photo cards again, back when photo was starting off. Ever since photographic only format 2, I don't think we've seen another repeat since then. So if this ends up being degenerate but inconsistent, I guess that's probably what my prediction is that this format's going to allow in a lot of degenerate stuff, but not all that degenerate stuff is actually going to be as consistent as it would be in a true multiverse format. It does, again, open the door for maybe some like B string, maybe C list cards that normally would be ignored because you'd be going for copy. It allows that kind of lower quality of card to maybe jump to the top a little bit more than it would. So overall, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about this format. I'm sure I'll play some games within it and have a more robust opinion once I get in there and remember how frustrating it is to just see people ramp into Dark Phoenix and then have the game be over even though nobody's dead. If you like what we're doing here, as always, you can support us at patreon.com/thebuildphase. Massive shout out to all of my patrons, and specifically Brad, Jason, Justin, Patrick, Peter, and Roland. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to keep the lights on around here. So if you want to support what we're doing, patreon.com/thebuildphase. This has been the featured format 19 Duality review and analysis. I'm Mr. Ben, and you should go win some games.